Hey, welcome to Draft Academy. My name's Mike. In this course, I'm going to teach you everything that you need to know to get started using Gatsby.js. Now, Gatsby.js is a relatively new static site generator that's built on top of Node.js, and it uses React in order to help you build an awesome, fast, and scalable static website. One of the things I love about Gatsby is that you build your static sites using React. And so you have all of the power, modularity, and scalability of React while still being able to generate static web pages which can be served extremely fast on your web server. So you write all of your pages in React, and you can access data, and you can make your pages interactive and do all sorts of cool things, and then you just generate a bunch of static pages and serve them up on your web server. In this course, we're going to talk about the basics. So we're going to get into installing Gatsby, building your first Gatsby site, fleshing out all the pages on your site, and then we're going to get a little more advanced. So we're going to talk about making your pages interactive, and we're going to look at how you can use GraphQL in order to access different types of data about your site. So we're going to be able to access metadata about the site. We'll be able to access information about the different files, and we'll also be able to parse through Markdown files on our site and display them in an awesome way. So if you're looking for a static site generator, you might want to consider using Gatsby. Not only is it backed by the awesome power of React, but it's also a new project, which means it's constantly being added to and developed. Gatsby's not going anywhere, and therefore you can feel safe investing some of your web infrastructure in it. Check out this Draft Academy course. We're going to give you everything you need to know to get started, and I'm excited to see what you guys learn. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you everything that you need to do to get Gatsby up and running on your computer. And one of the cool things about Gatsby is the way you install it on Windows and Mac is actually the same. So Gatsby relies on this program called Node.js. So all we have to do is install Node.js on your Windows or our Mac computer, and then using Node.js and something called the Node Package Manager, we can install Gatsby and get it up and running and ready to go. So if you already have Node.js and the Node Package Manager installed on your computer, then all you have to do is just skip to the end of the video and you'll see the part where I actually install Gatsby. But if you don't have Node.js installed on your computer, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that right now. So all you want to do is go over to this website here. It's nodejs.org/en/download. And there's three options here that we can click for our download: Windows, Mac, or the source code. So you just want to pick whichever operating system you're on. I'm on Mac, so I'm just going to click Mac. And once that's downloaded, I'm just going to go over to my downloads folder. And I'm just going to double click on this. And what this should do is open up this Node.js installer. So all we want to do here is just click continue and accept anything we need to accept. And then we can install Node.js on our computer. So once that's done installing, we want to check and just make sure that everything's installed correctly. So I'm going to open up a terminal, and I just want to type in the following code. We're just going to type node --version, and that should spit out a version. And then we can also type npm --version, and that should spit out another version. So we're using Node.js, and then in order to install Gatsby, we're going to use npm, which is the Node Package Manager. And that's basically just a program that we can use to install other programs. So we're going to use it to install Gatsby. So once you've validated that Node is installed correctly on your computer, we just have to use this Node Package Manager to install it. So I'm just going to type npm install --global, and then I just want to type Gatsby-CLI, and that just stands for Gatsby Command Line Interface. So this is how we're going to communicate with Gatsby. We're going to use this command line interface, and we'll be able to give Gatsby commands and tell it to do different things for us. So I'm just going to click enter, and this should go off and start installing everything that we need for Gatsby. And you can see here that it installed everything we needed, and it's just a bunch of different files. So in order to just validate that everything's installed correctly, we can just type Gatsby --version, and this should spit out a version of Gatsby. So as long as you can get that version to come out like this, then Gatsby is officially installed on your computer, and you're ready to start building your first Gatsby website. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about creating your first Gatsby site. So we're going to create our Gatsby site, And then we're going to look at some of the default folders and files that Gatsby creates for us when we make that new site. And then we're going to serve our site onto the internet, and we'll be able to see our site running on our local server. So let's get started. This is going to be an awesome tutorial. First thing I want to do to create my Gatsby site is open up a new terminal window. In my case, I just have one down here in my text editor. And in order to create our Gatsby site, we need to enter in some commands into this terminal. So I just want to type Gatsby, new, and now I want to type in the name of the website that I want to create. So this will be like the name of your Gatsby site. In my case, we'll just do GA_site for Draft Academy site. And now what we want to do is enter in the address of a project template that we can use. So Gatsby actually has a sort of like a hello world introductory project set up on GitHub, and all we have to do to access that is just type in this URL. So it's github.com/GatsbyJS/Gatsby starter hello world. So just enter this in after that Gatsby new command, and we'll be able to get that Gatsby starter project that we can use, and that's what I'm going to be using in this tutorial. So I'm just going to click enter, and Gatsby should go out and basically go out to GitHub, get that project template, and then start installing it onto our machine. So this could take anywhere from like 1 to 3 minutes. It really just depends, but it's probably not going to be like super fast. So that's done installing, and for me it took about a minute for that to install everything that it needed to install. And once that's done, if we come up here into our file explorer, you'll notice that I have this new folder that was created inside my documents folder called GA site. So this is the folder that Gatsby created for our project. So I'm just going to open this up, and I want to sort of talk you through what all of these different things are inside of here. It might be a little intimidating if you haven't worked with something that looks like this. Before I do that though, I just want to show you how we can actually build our site and see it online. So the way that we can do that is by coming back down here into our terminal, and I want to type the following commands. Well, first off, I just want to change directory into that new site, and then I want to type npm run develop. And what this is going to do is it's going to start up a Gatsby development server on our local host so that we can test our website out and sort of use it to develop. So this is like mostly what you're going to be using when you're testing your site. So that's finished running, and you'll see that we get all these success messages. I do just want to point out some of the stuff down here. You'll notice that this site is running at localhost 8000. So localhost is like a local web server that's on your computer. So if we go over to localhost 8000, we should be able to see our website up and running. And I just have this open here in my web browser. So I'm just going to refresh, and you'll see localhost 8000 is now hosting our site. It's a really simple site. It just says hello world. So this isn't like anything crazy, but this is actually our site running, and so any changes that we make to our site will show up here on this development server as long as that server is running. So back over in the text editor, again, I just want to talk you guys through sort of the default files that you'll see. Now, there are a couple things in here related to Node.js, and one of those things is this node modules folder. And you'll notice if you click down in this folder, there's like a bunch of other folders inside of here. This is just something that's used for Node.js. You're really not going to have to worry about this too much. Now, you're going to need it, so you don't want to delete it. But as far as like having to modify anything in there, you probably most likely won't have to. Next, we have this public folder. And you'll notice that there's really not too much stuff here in this public folder. And this public folder is basically the folder that represents like your finished static website. So you'll see later in this course we can build our website, which means we can compile all of the Gatsby pages that we write together into our finished static site that we can then serve onto the web. And all of your like static web pages and your finished static site is going to go inside of this public folder. So this is basically just what our site would look like now. And we could put these files on a web server and it would be our site. The next folder is probably the most important folder, and it's the folder that you're going to be using the most. It's this source folder, and this is where we're going to store all of the pages for our website. So if you're building like a blog site, you'd store all of your blog pages in here. If you're building a normal website, all your pages are going to go in here. And you'll see we have this pages folder by default, and then we have this index.js file. Now, because Gatsby is built on Node.js, and more specifically, Gatsby uses React.js, all of our files are actually just going to be JavaScript files. And so the content files that we write and a lot of like the files we write for our components are going to be JavaScript. You can also use other formats like Markdown and stuff like that too. But for now, in this default structure, we just have this pages folder, and then we have this index.js file. So really the source folder, like I said, is the most important folder, and it's gonna be where you're spending most of your time. There's also some other files down here. This .gitignore file, this is just a file that's used with Git. And then we have these package.json files. And this is another file that's used with Node.js, and there will be a couple instances where we're gonna have to modify this. But for the most part, the package.json file basically just manages all the dependencies and all sort of like the overall settings of your Node.js app, which is what we have right here. So package.json file is important, but for like the normal use cases, you probably won't have to touch it that much. So like I said, for the most part, this source folder is going to be really important. So that's a basic overview of the folder structure in Gatsby, and we also got our site up and running on that local host. So now you're ready to go out and start adding content to your site and really start digging deep into Gatsby. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about adding content to your Gatsby files. So basically, we're just going to take that default index file that Gatsby gives us, and we're going to add in some different HTML elements, and we're going to talk about how you can start building your pages. So over here, I just have this basic Gatsby default layout, and inside the source folder in pages, we have this index.js file. And if you look over here on my website, I'm actually viewing this index file. So this index.js file is like the root directory. It's like the home page of our website. And you'll see in here that there's a bunch of React code. Actually, it's JavaScript, but it's using React. And so if this doesn't look super familiar to you, it's actually basically just using this framework called React.js. And you don't need to know too much about React to use Gatsby, but it does help to be like a little bit familiar with it. But for now, just know that like all this fancy code over here is JavaScript, and it's for this React framework. What you can see here is that we have a bunch of stuff that looks like HTML, and it's very similar to HTML, and it works the same way. So we just have this div, and then inside of it, we have hello world. And what's cool is that by default, Gatsby is a hot reloading framework. So if I make a change over here to this div, it'll automatically get updated over here on our website. So I could say like, hello world, it's me. And when I save this page, it automatically gets updated. So without me having to refresh the browser, it will automatically save over here. So kind of makes it really easy for you to develop your site. You know, it really makes the development cycle a lot quicker. You don't have to like go over and physically refresh the page. Every time, whenever you make a change, it's just automatically appearing over here. So that's just like a little thing that makes Gatsby pretty cool. In addition to having, like, for example, a div, we could also have other HTML elements. So I could put like a header in here, right? We could say like, here's a header, and then I could have maybe like a paragraph as well. And when that loads up, you'll see it loads up just like normal HTML. Now, one thing that you need to keep in mind when you're writing content inside of these files is you can't have two HTML elements that are at the same level. So if I was to come over here and create a paragraph, and I created this paragraph at the same level of this div. So these are like what are called sibling elements. When I save the page, you'll notice that I get an error, and that's because it says you have adjacent JSX elements. And so really, although this looks like we're writing in HTML, we're actually writing in a special JavaScript HTML like hybrid language called JSX. And it's basically like a way that you can write HTML inside of a JavaScript file, but one of the rules is that you can't have two sibling elements just like this. So everything has to be wrapped inside of like a single element. Like if I put this inside of this div, then this error should go away and it should just show up. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're writing content inside of something like this. And inside of this JSX, we can also make some styling. So I could like style this div, and the way that we would style this would be style and then equals, and then inside these double curly brackets we can put some CSS. So I could say like color, and I could do a colon, and then I need to put this inside of quotation marks, but I could say like blue. And now this will change all of the text to blue, or I could change it to tomato, and it would change it to tomato. So you can use CSS sort of inline just like this. And if I wanted to add, for example, like another attribute here, so I could say like background color, we could set this equal to blue, and it'll set the background to blue. So you can add in different CSS stylings inside of these JSX elements, just very similar to how you would in HTML. If you're familiar with CSS, then you'll notice that this is a little bit different, but the same concepts apply. Another thing we could do would be link to an image. So I could say like IMG, and I just have this image of this cute cat because we're on the internet. So I'll paste this in here, and then we can just close off this image tag, and now this image should show up in our website. So yeah, there's the image of the cat. It's like way too big, but you can see that it shows up nonetheless. So that's kind of like the basics of, you know, adding in content into these JavaScript files, and you can see that it's actually pretty easy. And it's very similar to just writing normal HTML. And so if you're not familiar with JSX and how that works and how it kind of is used in React, then you might want to look that up. But for the most part, you know, as long as you're just writing normal HTML, you're pretty much safe, and it's probably going to work like 90% of the time. But yeah, so that's kind of the basics of adding content to these files. And any of these JS files that we store over here in this pages folder, you can basically do this with. So you can just put all your sort of HTML text and HTML tags over here, and it'll just display on the website normally. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about linking between the pages on our website in Gatsby. So up to this point in the tutorial, we just have this one page, which is index.js. But in any good website, you're going to have more than one page. So eventually, you're going to want to be able to link between the different pages on your website. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. The first thing we want to do if we're going to link between pages on our site is we want to go up here and we want to add in another import statement. So I'm just going to say import, and instead of saying React, we'll say link from, and then inside of quotation marks, we're just going to type Gatsby-link. What this is going to do is it's going to allow us to use a React component, and that React component is called link. And basically all you need to know is that we can use the link component or the link tag in order to create a link between the pages on our site. So I want to come down here into this HTML, and I'm just going to use this link tag. So now that we imported it, we can use a tag called link. And then I'm gonna say link to, and then I want to type the address of the page that I want to link to. If you're familiar with normal HTML, then you'll know about like a normal link, which is just the a tag. And normally we would just type like a and then href, and then inside of here we would put the path of the page that we wanted to visit. But since this is Gatsby and since we're using React, we have to do it this way. So we can use this link. And then inside here, I'm just going to put, this will link to like page 2. And then I can put some text in here. So we'll say like page 2, and then we can close off this link just like that. So what this will do is create a link to page 2 on our website. So now if I head over here, you'll see that we have this link. And when I click this link, you'll notice that we get this development 404 page. So basically 404 page not found, right? This page isn't on our website, and that's kind of a problem. So let's come over here into this pages folder, and we'll make a new file. And I'm just going to call it page-2.js. So this is going to be another JavaScript file. And I want to just, actually, I'm just going to go back here. We don't get this red screen of death. I want to come over here to this index, and I'm just going to copy all of the code from in here, and I'll just paste it into this new page. That way we don't have to write it out, we can just have it. And I'm just gonna get rid of some of this stuff, and on this new page we'll just say that this is page 2. And so now our link should actually work. So when I click this page 2 link, it'll bring me to this page on our website, and you'll see that it does. Another thing we could do would be create another link on this page, and we'll link back to the home page. So I'm gonna copy the link that we have over here, and I'll bring it here into page 2. And now instead of linking to page 2, we can just link to the home page, which is just a /, and we can say go home. And so now we have this go home link, and we can link back to the home page. So these links are now operational, and we can link between the pages on our site. So you could, I mean, if you created like a bunch of different pages on your site, then you could create the links for them. Another thing I want to point out is we can also put pages inside of subdirectories. So if I created a folder, let's call this folder dir1, and inside of dir1 we'll make a new file, and we'll just call it page-3, and that's going to be another JavaScript file. And again, I'm just going to copy this code, and we'll put it inside of page 3. And so from the home page now, we can also, in addition to linking to page 2, we can link to page 3, except now when we put our path, we're going to want to put dir1 / page 3. And this should link us to page 3. So, you know, organizing your content inside of this pages directory is something that you want to, you know, actually do. And really the pages directory is kind of like the root directory of your web server. And so, you know, index.js and page 2 are both at the root directory, right? And then page 3 is inside of this subdirectory dir1. So you really want to pay attention to how you're ordering your content, and that's kind of how you can do it in Gatsby. In this tutorial, we're going to talk about making your Gatsby pages interactive. One of the cool things about Gatsby is it's built using this framework called React.js. And React.js was built by Facebook, and so you know it's like a powerhouse framework. One of the cool things about React is that it allows us to make our websites really interactive. So the user can actually like interact with the website, and the website will respond to the user. And I'm going to show you how we can build a page that just implements like a simple little counter. So you'll press like a plus button, and the counter will increment, and then you'll press a minus button, and the counter will decrement. So the first thing I want to do is come over here into this pages folder, and I'm going to create a new file. We're just going to call this counter.js. So inside of this counter file, we are going to make our counter. And then in our index file, I just want to create a link so that we can easily get to this counter page. And so this will just link us to the counter. And so actually, I'm going to put a break in here. So now when we click this link, it'll bring us over to our counter page. Now, there is some like default code that I want to put inside this counter.js file. And I'm just going to paste it in, and then I'm going to explain what the code is doing, and then you can just copy it in on your own. And that way you can practice kind of like writing this stuff out. So you'll notice I just pasted in a bunch of code, and this code actually looks a little bit different than the code that we had in our index.js file. And that's because this code is different. So again, this is just JavaScript code, and it's code that's for the React framework. And I'll just kind of walk you through what's in here. So up here, we're just importing React. And now we're creating a class called counter, and it's extending the React.component. So basically this is going to be a React component, which is basically just like a little component inside of React that can do certain things. So, and then we have this render function right here, and basically anything that goes inside of this render function is going to get displayed on the page. And so here we're returning all of the stuff that's going to get displayed. So we're just returning whatever is in here. And so inside of this class, we can put a bunch of code that's going to help to make our React component dynamic. So it'll help to make our page dynamic. And so now on this counter page, we just have basically just a div that says that it's the class component. And now I want to start adding in some code. So the first thing I'm going to do is add in some HTML elements, and this will kind of like be the setup for our counter. So inside of these divs, I'm just going to paste in this code. And you'll notice here we have a bunch of code. So we have a header that says counter, we have a paragraph that says the current count, which is 0, and then we have two buttons, a plus button and a minus button. So eventually what we want to happen is when the user clicks this plus button, we want this counter to increment, and when the user clicks this minus button, we want the counter to decrement. So over here on our page, we just have the plus and the minus buttons, and you'll notice that nothing happens right now, but all we have to do is just add in a little bit of logic into this React class, into this Gatsby class, and it'll start working. So the first thing I'm going to do is add in what's called a constructor. So up here, I'm just going to paste in some more code. So it's going to look like this, and actually this isn't formatted very well. But this is a constructor function. So basically what this is doing is this gets called whenever we create this class or whenever we like reload the page. And it's setting this variable called state. And so state is a variable that basically represents the state of the component. And I'm not going to get too much into what state does, but for all you need to know for now is just that inside of this state variable, we can store a variable called count. So basically we can store the current count inside of this state object. So we can store the count right there. And then I also want to add in some other code, and it's actually going to go in the counter. And so I'm just going to put this right here. And you'll notice that now instead of just having 0 here when we're trying to access the current count, we have something that says this.state.count. And what this is doing is it's accessing this state variable up here. So basically, instead of just displaying 0, we want to display the value of the count inside of the state. And then there's one more thing we need to do, which is get the buttons working, right? In other words, we want something to happen when we click the buttons, because right now when we click these buttons, nothing happens, right? If I click the plus button and the minus button, the count just stays where it is. So what we need to do is add in a little function in here to this button tag. And again, I'm just going to paste it in, and then I'll show you what it's doing. So what it looks like here is we have button, and then it says on click equals, and then we have these open curly brackets and then two parentheses. And what we're doing here is we're setting the state. So it says this dot set state, and then inside of here it just says count. And so basically what this is doing is it's decrementing the counter, right? So it's subtracting 1 from the counter. And actually, I think I could probably format this a little bit better so you guys can see it. Right, so this is basically just what it's going to look like right here. And actually, this should be the minus button because we're decrementing. So then I can take this same type of code and use it for the plus button. But instead of decrementing it, so instead of subtracting 1 over here, we can just add 1. So I'm going to do the same thing, and I'm just going to paste it in here. And so now when I refresh this page, what should happen is when I click the minus button, the current count should decrement, and when I click the plus button, the current count should increment. And you'll see I'm clicking the plus button and the counter is incrementing, and I'm clicking the minus button and it's decrementing. So that's kind of how you can make your pages dynamic. And so basically I'm just using this onClick function down here, and it's setting the state variable, which we set up here in the constructor, and it's either incrementing that count or it's decrementing that count. And that's kind of how, that's one way that you can make your pages interactive. Obviously, the more you learn about React.js, the more you'll be able to use these React components to make your website more interactive and more dynamic. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can build your Gatsby website. So let's say that you have a bunch of different files and folders and resources on your website, and now you want to serve it up on a web server, right? Well, how can we access all of those files? In other words, up until now, we've been testing our website on this localhost development server. But what happens when you want to take those files and put them up on a server of your own? Well, we can actually use a build command in order to build our Gatsby website. So basically, we can execute a certain command, and then Gatsby will go out and build all of our pages together into static pages that we can then copy and paste or FTP or whatever over onto our web server. So I'm just going to show you how to do that really quick. So I just want to cd into my directory, and once I'm inside of my project directory, I can run a simple command, which is just npm run build. And basically this is just going to tell Gatsby like, hey, we want to build our site. So I'm going to click enter. And this is going to go off and do a bunch of stuff. It's going to build up our entire website. So once that's done building, I want to head over to my file tree. And you'll see here we have this folder called public. And this is where Gatsby spit out all of our static files. So inside of this public folder, I'm just going to open it up, and you'll notice that there's a bunch of files, and there's a bunch of like JavaScript files in here and stuff like that. But basically this is our entire site. So there's actually a lot of these different files, and that's kind of what it's going to be like. But you'll also notice up here we have like directory 1, and then there's this page 3 and page 2, and there's this static folder and this counter folder. So this is actually all of the resources that we need to include on our web server if we want to run our site. So all I would have to do would be like copy and paste this stuff onto my web server, and it would start working. Or you could serve up all of this stuff using like some sort of a deployment app like Netlify or something like that. But basically all you need to know is that this public folder has all the files that you need for your website. So anytime that you make a change to your website and you want to regenerate the files, you can actually just run that npm run build command again, and it'll build all these files, and it'll sort of like overwrite the public folder and do everything that you need it to do inside of there. In this tutorial, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of using components in React. Now, I could make an entire course just talking about using components in React. And if you're not familiar with how React works and how components work, then this will just kind of give you a brief overview of how these components work and really just sort of help you to wrap your mind around what we're doing here. So a component in React is basically just a collection of JSX or a collection of HTML that has maybe some styling, maybe some logic, and it's sort of contained in this one class or this one container. And what we can do then is import that into other files on our website and sort of use it. And the best way for me to explain this is just to kind of show you. So earlier in this tutorial, we created this counter.js class. And if I go over here on my website, I can click, and you'll see this is the counter. And basically all it does is just increments and decrements a counter when you click these buttons. Now this is what's called a React component. And so you'll notice that the whole component is just this thing right here, and it has some of this JSX, some of this HTML style stuff in here, right? And then it also has this constructor function up here, and it has these functions like this onClick function inside of this button. So there's a lot going on inside of this component. Now imagine that I wanted to take this counter and I wanted to insert it on another page in my website, right? So here on the home page, how about instead of just linking to counter, so instead of just having this counter link, imagine I wanted to actually physically put the counter on the page. Well, the way that we can do that is by inserting our component or including our component inside of our index file. And I'll show you how we can do that. First thing we want to do is come up here, and I'm just going to type import, and then I want to type the name of the React component that I want to import. So in our case, it's going to be counter. And then I'm going to say from, and here we just want to put the path to the file. And this is going to be the path to the file starting at the root directory of our website. So it's just going to be /, and then it's just called counter.js. And actually, I don't think we need the JS. So we've imported this counter, and now we can actually use it. So I can come down here in my JSX, and let's say that instead of just linking, we want to now actually include the counter. So I'll get rid of this, and I'm going to add in this counter tag. So this is the name of the component, so we're going to refer to it just like this. and then I can just do a / and we'll close off this tag. And so now when we save this page, the counter shows up over here. And so instead of just having that counter on its own page, right? So if we go over to this counter page, the counter is here, but now we can just include that counter on our own page. And that's basically how you're going to be building your pages using in Gatsby, right? You want to be using these components, and it takes a little while to kind of get used to using these components, but it's a really great way to develop, and that's basically the whole point of React, is to break up your website into these different components. Now there's another thing that you can do with these React components, and you can actually pass them information. So in here I could pass this counter, for example, like a color. So I could say color is equal to, and we'll just pass in blue. And I can actually access this color variable from inside my component. So I'm here in my counter component, and if I wanted to access the color, I could basically just type out something like this. So I can do open and closed curly brackets, and then I can type this dot props, and then I want to type the name of the variable that we passed in. So it's just going to be color in our case. And this will print out the color. So over here you can see it's printing out blue. And I can actually use this color to style this component. So I could come up here to this div, and we could make a style, and then inside these style tags I could say color, and I could set it equal to this dot props dot color. And so now this component is going to be colored blue. And what's cool is I can change the color of this from in this file. So if I wanted to make this like green, for example, I could just pass in green, and now the counter is going to be green. So that's kind of how you can use these components to make your website more powerful. And obviously you can create more than just a counter. So I could create, you know, a couple dozen of these components and add them in on my website. Like I could create a component for like a navigation list. I could create a component for the header of my website. I could create a component for a button. Really doesn't matter. You can create components for anything, and then you can sort of just use them on your web pages in order to build your user interface. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about using plugins in Gatsby. One of the cool things about Gatsby is it allows you to install and use external plugins inside of your project, and these external plugins can do a bunch of cool things. They can add elements to your website, or they can make your website more powerful. So you definitely want to consider using plugins if you're building a Gatsby site. I'm over here in my web browser on this page right here. It's gatsbyjs.org /docs/plugins. And this is sort of like the official plugins page for Gatsby. And so if we just scroll down on this page, you'll see there's this huge list of official Gatsby plugins that you can use. And a lot of these plugins were just developed by Gatsby. And there's also a bunch of plugins that were developed by the community. And these plugins do a wide variety of things, all sorts of stuff. And they can really just make your website a lot more powerful. And so what you should do is just kind of click through these plugins and see if any catch your eye, see if any, might be useful on your website. For example, here's one for Google Analytics. And for a lot of these plugins, the ones that are official plugins, there's like they have their own page on Gatsby's website. So you'll see like this plugin has its own page, and there's like installation instructions, and it tells you how to use them. A lot of these plugins will require like a little bit of configuration to really get them going. And then a lot of these community plugins will just link you to a GitHub page. And you can, same thing, just read the readme.markdown file, and they give you the installation instructions and stuff like that. So I want to talk to you in this video about, in downloading and installing your own plugin. And in this video, we're actually going to install a plugin for Typography.js. And Typography.js is like a CSS framework that we can use inside of our website to kind of just make it look better and style it a little bit better by default. So imagine something like Bootstrap, which styles your website. That's kind of like the plugin that we're going to be using. So the way that you install these plugins, and the first thing that you always have to do is install the plugin using the Node package manager. So I'm just going to go down in my terminal, and I'm just going to type out the following command. I'm just going to type npm install --save, and the plugin that I'm going to be installing is this Gatsby plugin typography. And what this will do is it'll install everything we need to run that typography.js on our Gatsby website. So I'm just going to click enter, and Node Package Manager will go out and do its thing and get everything it needs to run typography. Once that's finished running and you get a success, then there's one more thing that we have to do, which is we basically just have to tell Gatsby that we want to use that plugin. So we have to let Gatsby know, like, hey, we installed this plugin and we want to use it in our website. And the way we can do that is by telling Gatsby inside of this gatsbyconfig.js file. Now, this isn't a file that's going to be inside of your directory by default, and so you want to create this file. And you want to create this file at the root directory of your site. So in my case, it would be inside of this GA site folder. So this Gatsby config file should be, in the same directory as the source folder and the public folder. Inside of this gatsbyconfig.js file, we want to type a few things. The first thing we're just going to type is module.exports, and this is going to be equal to two curly brackets. And then inside of here, I just want to make an array, so it's going to be plugins. And inside of this plugins array, we're just going to type out all the plugins that we want to use. So in my case, I'm using the Gatsby plugin typography. Once you have this in here, basically this is just telling Gatsby, like, hey, we want to use this plugin. And this Gatsby's going to read this config file every time it builds your site. So what we want to do is just restart our website. So restart our web server, and I just have it running down here. So I'm just going to Gatsby develop, and we'll restart our web server. And actually, I think I spelled module wrong. Yes, that's why that's not working. So now that that's finished running, I want to go over to my website. And right here, you'll notice that the text has actually changed style. So before, the text was like not really styled very well, and now it actually looks pretty good. And so what actually happened was this typography plugin got used by Gatsby, and it changed the way that our text looked, right? So the typography is like a CSS framework, so it's changing the look and the feel of our site. And if I inspect this page and I go up here in the head of our website, you'll see that there's this new element here. It's this style tag, and it says ID is typography.js. And so actually what happened was Gatsby used that typography plugin to add this typography code inside of our Gatsby site. So all we had to do was just configure the plugin, and our website is automatically styled with this cool typography theme. So, what you should do is go over to this plugins website and play around with different plugins, see how they work on your website, see if you like them, see if you don't like them. And, just basically use them to make your site better any way that you can. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about using layouts in Gatsby. Layouts are basically special types of files that will act as a template for all the pages on our website. So imagine there was a scenario where we were creating a website, and for every single page on the website, we wanted to have like the same layout, right? So on every page, we wanted to have the same header, and we wanted to have the same footer. Maybe we wanted to have like the same navigational list, and we wanted it to be the same for all the pages on our website. Now, one way we could do that would just be to copy and paste that header footer code onto every single page in our website, right? So if we had 100 pages, we would copy and paste it 100 times onto all those pages. But a better way to do that would be to just define some overall layout for our site, and then have all the pages on our site inherit from that layout. And so all the pages on our site would use that layout as their template or as their skeleton of HTML code, and then they could just, whatever content is inside that given page would just be inserted inside that layout. So I'm going to show you how to build layouts inside of Gatsby. The way that we do that is by first coming over to this source folder, and I want to create a new folder inside of here, and I'm just going to call it layouts. And then inside of this layouts folder, we can create a new file, and we'll just call this index.js. And index.js is going to be the default layout that all of the pages on our site are going to use. So in here, I'm just going to paste in some code, and I'll talk about what we have here. So I just have import React from React, and then export default, and then you need this parentheses with curly brackets inside and children. And then here we have the actual layout of our website. And so as long as you have something that looks like this, then you should be able to implement this layout. Now, there's this special tag right here. It's children. It's basically like a children function that it's calling, and it's inside of these curly brackets. And what this will represent is the content of the page that we're currently on. So just to demonstrate this, I will type out some text. So we're going to say layout, and we'll say layout. And when I go over to my website, and actually before we do that, whenever you make a new layout, you need to restart your development server. So I'm going to restart my Gatsby server, just like that. And once that's done restarting, when I refresh this page, you'll notice that now instead of just having hello world and this is a paragraph, we have these layouts up here. And so layout is surrounding the content of my page. And I actually have a couple other pages here. I also have page 2, and I have a page 3. So if I go over to /page 2, it's the same thing. So on this page 2, it's using the same layout that our home page used. And if I go to page 3, it's the same thing. So page 3 is also using this layout. So by default, all the pages on our website are going to be using this layout. And these layouts are awesome because over here, for example, I could define like a header for my page, and this will just be a really simple header. And then I could also define like a footer down here. And that header and that footer are going to show up on every single page inside of our website. So this makes it really easy to define a layout for all the pages on your site. So you could have your header up here and your footer down there, and whenever you want to change the way that the header or the footer looks, you only have to change it right here on this layouts page, or on this index file inside the layouts folder. You don't have to change it on any of the other pages, and that just makes your site more modular and more scalable. So play around with these layouts, and you can basically just structure your whole site inside of this layout, and then all of your content will just get injected into the layout from this children function. In this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you about using data in Gatsby. And this is just going to be like a quick introduction into how we can store some external data about our website and then access that data inside of our pages. So imagine that I wanted to store some information about my site. Maybe I wanted to store like the title of my website and the author of the website, and I wanted to be able to access that information inside of multiple pages on my site. Well, one way I could do that would be to just write out that information in each one of my pages. So I could create a header in each page and put in the site title, right? But here's the problem. If I want to then change that title, I would have to go through to every single page on my site and manually change the title. I'd have to do some sort of like a find replace, and that could be really messy, and it could be potentially dangerous if not everything is like spelled the same or whatever. An easier way would just be to store the title of my website inside of a variable somewhere, and then have all of my pages fetch that data and use that variable, right? That way, if I wanted to change the title, I would only have to change it in one spot, and it would automatically update on all the pages in my site. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can do something exactly like that in Gatsby. We want to open up this Gatsby config JavaScript file. And if you don't have this file, it's located at the root directory of your project. So in my case, it's right here in this GA site folder. And if you don't have it, you can just create it. So this is basically like the main settings configuration for our Gatsby app. So in here, you can put all sorts of important things that will help Gatsby to configure itself and to just do what it has to do. So inside of this module.exports function, or object, you want to add this in. We're going to put an attribute. It's going to be called site metadata, and this is going to be an object. And inside of this site metadata object, we can put any variables that we want to access about our site. So I could put like title, and we could give our website a title. So we could say like Draft Academy's website. I could also give this something, maybe like an author. And we can just say the author's me, Mike. So obviously this is just some very simple data, but I'm storing it about my website. Now what I can do is I can configure each one of my pages to go out and grab this information. And so my pages will be able to display the website title and the website author. And if I ever want to change those, I only have to change them in this config file. I don't have to touch the pages that are pulling this data. So I'm going to head over to one of my pages. We'll just go to index.js. This is the home page. And in here, what I want to do is make some simple modifications which will allow me to grab the data that is coming from this Gatsby config.js file. So the first thing I want to do is add what's called a GraphQL query. And GraphQL is a querying language that was developed by Facebook, and it was designed to be used with React. And basically you can use GraphQL in order to grab information from external sources. In our case, we are grabbing information from this Gatsby config.js file. So GraphQL is a querying language, a lot like SQL if you've ever used SQL before. We can use GraphQL to write queries to get information. And that's what I'm going to do down here. I actually have some code that I'm going to paste in here, and then I'm going to explain what it does. So this code that I just pasted in is actually a GraphQL query. And what this is doing is it's going out to that config file and it's grabbing the title and the author. So you can see it's just export const query is equal to GraphQL, and then we have this single quote, and then there's another single quote down here, and then we have the query, which is just the name of the query up here, and then we want to grab information about the site and the site metadata and the title and the author. So what you want to do is just paste this down into your file. So any files that you want to access the site metadata, you want to paste one of these GraphQL queries into there. And as long as you have this GraphQL query in here, we'll actually be able to access the information that's inside the site metadata. So once you have this query inside of your file, you want to come up here, and I'm here at this export default, and inside of these parentheses you just want to put 2 curly brackets, and we're just going to type out data. And what this is going to do is it's going to inject the data from this query into our JSX. And so now we can actually access the data from the query inside of our JSX code here. So if I wanted to do that, I could just come over here and we could actually print out either the website title or the author. So why don't we do that? Inside of this header 1, instead of saying hello world, why don't we print out the title of the website? So inside of some curly brackets, I'm just going to type out data.site metadata, and then I want to type out the name of the variable that I want to access, the name of the attribute that I want to access. So it's just going to be title. So if I save this page, and just a quick note, whenever you modify your Gatsby config file, you have to restart your Gatsby development servers. And you can see that the text over here is updated. So now instead of saying hello world, it says Draft Academy's website. And I could also access the author. So let's put the author down here in this paragraph. We'll just say, and now we should be able to see the author of the page, which is Mike. So basically what we did was we stored information about our website, some global variables, inside of this config Gatsby file. So we stored a title and an author, and then we were able to access that title and that author by running this GraphQL query. Okay? And then that GraphQL query grabbed the data for us and injected it into our React function here, and then we were able to access them inside of the JSX. So that's sort of the flow of the data. And there's one more thing I want to show you, which is a really cool feature that we can use with Gatsby, which is called GraphIQL. And GraphIQL is something that I have open right here. And the way you access it is by going to localhost 8000 /3 underscores and then GraphQL. And you actually don't need this query part right here. And this is a sort of a user interface, a GUI for testing out GraphQL queries. So inside of here, you could test out and write different queries that you might be writing. Obviously, the query that we wrote over here, this is a pretty simple query, but if you have more complex queries, then you're going to want to be able to test them out. So if I wanted to, I could actually test out a query here. So I could say, like, we could test out the query that we're writing on this page. So I could say site, and then site metadata, and then inside of here I could try to access the title and the author. And you'll notice what I wrote here is basically just what I have down here. So I'm testing out this query, and then I can run it, and we'll see what returns back. So without actually putting this inside my website, I can test out the query and make sure that I'm getting the correct data back. So this graphed IQL feature of Gatsby can be really useful for helping you to test out your queries and really just supercharging your workflow. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about using data in Gatsby. Now, in the last tutorial, if you're following along with the course, we looked at grabbing data about the site. So inside of our Gatsby config.js file, we had this site metadata in here, and we stored two values about our website, title and author. And then on this index.js page, we ran a GraphQL query, and then we were able to access that information from inside of our JSX. So over here we have this website that's pulling the title of the website, and it's pulling the author of the website. This is a great way to use data and store data about your website, but it's kind of limited, right? In other words, you're only able to pull the data that you can store inside of this site metadata object. So using Gatsby, we can actually access other types of data. And one type of data that we can access is data about the files in our website. So one thing that you might be curious if you're building a website is, what are the other pages? Like, how can we get information about all of the pages on our site? In this tutorial, I'm going to show you exactly how you can do that. We'll be able to use GraphQL queries to figure out information about the different pages on our site. Therefore, using that, you can build things like directories, or you can figure out, what pages are in what directories and what pages are doing what. It's really powerful. So the first thing that we want to do in order to do something like that is we need to install a Gatsby plugin. And this plugin is called Gatsby Source File System. And basically what this plugin is going to do is it's going to allow us to access information about our file system. So I'm just going to paste this in down here into my terminal, and you can go ahead and copy this. It's just npm install -- save Gatsby source file system. So we want to run that, and we're going to let Node Package Manager install that onto our computer. Once that's installed, now we just have to tell Gatsby about it. So I'm going to come over here into my Gatsby config.js file, and inside of here I want to create a new attribute in here, and you might already have something like this, but it's going to be plugins. And so it's just going to say plugins, and then this is going to be an array. And so this is just an array of the different plugins on our site. And I want to add in the plugin that we just installed. So you want to put this code in here, and it's basically just saying that we want to use the Gatsby source file system, and then we're passing it some different options. So we're passing it, the name is source, and then we're passing it the directory name /source. So this is basically just telling Gatsby where all of the files on our website are located, and then it can go there and figure out what we have available. Once you update your Gatsby config.js file, you want to restart your development server, so I'm just going to do that. And now that this is restarted, we can actually start using this Gatsby source file system. So I'm going to come over here into my web browser, and I'm going to open up this GraphQL URL. So it's localhost 8000 /3 and then GraphQL, and this is called GraphIQL, and it's basically just a user interface for running GraphQL queries, so we can test out GraphQL queries inside of here. What I want to type out is just open and close curly brackets, and if you type in start typing in A, then you should see this all file attribute should come up, and if you type in F, you should see that file comes up. So this file and this all file, these both have to do with the plugin that we just installed. And so because we installed that plugin, we're now able to see these two guys. So I'm just going to click on all file, and then what you can actually do is just click, if you're on a Mac, you can click Command Enter. If you're on Windows, you can click Control Enter. and that's going to automatically fill out this query for us. And so you can see it's all file, edges, node, and then right here we're looking at ID. So right now what we're doing is this query is grabbing the ID of all of the pages on our website. So if we look over here, you can see that it's pretty much doing that. So the ID is basically just the path. So we have this index.js file, we have this counter.js file, we have this other index.js file, this page2 file, and page3. And those are all the pages that I have over here on my website. So this is just looping through the file system for my website and just printing it out. And in addition to printing out the ID, so you can print out ID here, and you can also print out a bunch of other stuff. So if you just click Control Space, then this will give you an option for, it'll give you like a drop down with all the options. So we could search for the parent, children pages, internal, source instance name, absolute path, relative path, extension. So why don't we search for extension, and we'll search for relative path. So this will give us the extension of all the files and the relative path of all the files. And I'll run this query, and you can see that most of these are like JS files, and then we have the relative paths for all the pages. So a query like this can be really useful because not only does it allow us to loop through all the pages on our site, but it allows us to access different information about all the pages on our site. Like you can see we have all these things here. So if you were building like a breadcrumbs navigation, for example, you could use this parent or this children attribute in order to do that. You can use these absolute and relative paths to build links. So you could build like a table of contents or something like that. So using these all file queries is a really great way to make your website more powerful. So I'm actually going to give you a demonstration of building something like a navigation list. I'm going to go over here to my index.js file, and this is just like the home page of my website. And I'm going to be kind of pasting some different code in here, so you can just kind of follow along with what I'm doing and then sort of implement your own version of this. So the first thing I want to do is just make sure that I have this data attribute set up here. So I want to pass the data into my website. And I'm just going to get rid of these two guys. And I want to change up this query. So right now this query is accessing the title and the author of the site metadata, but we want to change it up. So we actually want it to be the query that, or similar to the query that we ran over here. And the query I'm going to be using is going to look like this. So I'm just going to paste this in, and you can see it's just what we did over there in that GraphQL, but now we're accessing relative path, pretty size, extension, and birth time. So this will give us some interesting information about all the pages on our site. And then up here in our JSX, we can actually grab that information and use it. So once again, I'm just going to be pasting some code in here, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. And basically what I pasted was a table. And this is just a basic sort of JSX table. Up here I have the table head, and we have these table headers, which are basically just displaying all of those attributes. And then inside the table, I'm accessing all of these attributes. So what I'm doing is I'm looping through the results of the all files query. So that all files query, if we look over here on the GraphQL, you'll notice that it returned an array. So it returned an array of all of the different pages on our website. So what I'm doing over here is I'm looping through all of the elements in that array, and I'm mapping them to basically table rows, so rows in the table. So each one of these, like node.relative path, each time through the loop, that's going to represent a different relative path of a different page on the website. So if I save this file and I head back over here to my normal website, you'll notice that we have a table that's just listing out all of the pages in our website. And this isn't formatted perfectly, but you kind of get the idea, right? It's giving the relative path of each of the pages on our website, the extension, how long ago it was made, and then the pretty size, so basically like how big the file is. And this is just one example of being able to loop through all of these pages. So when you're able to access all of this information about the pages on your file system, it really makes it a lot easier to build out certain navigational elements of your website, and also just to have information about the different pages on your website. In this tutorial, I want to talk to you about accessing Markdown data in Gatsby. Now, if you've been following along with this course, you'll know that we've been learning how to grab data and bring it into our Gatsby files. So I can go out and I can grab information about the Gatsby website, and I can also get information about the overall file system that we're using. So if you look over here on this page right here, I'm basically have a table that's listing out all of the pages that are inside of my website. But here's a question, like, imagine that instead of just listing out pages, you actually wanted to access information inside of those pages. So this is all information about the pages, right? We have the relative path, the size, the extension, when it was created, but this isn't actually giving us, it's only giving us information about the page. It's not giving us like what's inside of the page itself. And if you're trying to build like a blog or something, or especially if you're trying to work with Markdown, you're gonna wanna be able to access more information about the page. You're gonna wanna be able to like figure out, okay, what information is actually inside of these Markdown files that I'm creating, and be able to use that information to display those pages better. So in order to do that, we need to actually install another plugin. And before I install the plugin, I just wanna make a new Markdown file. So inside of my pages directory, I'm just gonna make a Markdown file called my first post. And this will just sort of represent like a Markdown file post that we can access. And inside of this post, I want to start by writing something called front matter. And front matter is basically information that you can write about the different pages or the different Markdown pages on your website. So up here in between these three dashes, I can actually write some variables. So I could define a title, and we can just say that this is like my, and then I could also define something else like an author. So I could, define like who's writing this. So we could just say it's me. So this is called front matter, and this is basically just data that you're defining about the data in this file. So it's metadata. And then we can just put some content. So this is the content in my Markdown. So what I want to be able to do is run a query to be able to access this Markdown. And first thing I'll point out is, if you notice over here, the table that we're looking at here is actually updated. And so now it's including my first post.markdown. And over here, I'm using the source file system plugin in order to display this stuff. And so automatically when I create this new Markdown file, it gets added into our table here. But instead of just being able to figure out that we have a Markdown file, I actually want to be able to access the information inside of this file. So I want to be able to access the actual Markdown content right here, and then I want to be able to access these front matter variables up here. And if I can do that, then I can create a listing on my page that will list out all of these files, or all of these Markdown files. And the way that I do that is opening up my terminal, and I actually want to install something, and this is going to be another Gatsby plugin. And I'm just going to paste this down here, and you'll notice it's just npm install -- save Gatsby transformer remark. So this is going to be a plugin that's going to allow us to do some stuff with those Markdown files. So I'm just going to click enter, and npm is going to go off and do its thing. And once that's done running, we can actually go over to our Gatsby config file and tell Gatsby that we want to use it. So over in this Gatsby config file, down here inside of this plugins array, I'm just going to add another entry, and we're just going to type out the name of the plugin that we just downloaded. So it's just going to be Gatsby transformer remark, just like that. So once we have that in here, I just want to restart my Gatsby development server. And now that this is running, I want to head over to this GraphIQL user interface, and we can start trying to access the information in this Markdown file. Since you just added that new plugin, we should now have access to a couple new attributes inside of this GraphQL. And you want to just start typing out all, and what you should see is all Markdown remark. And you can also just start typing Markdown, and you'll see that these two new options have appeared. So Markdown remark and all Markdown remark. And these are now things that we can use to query the Markdown files in our file system. So I'm just going to do all Markdown remark, and I'm just going to click Control Enter or Command Enter, and this will start up a default query for us. So this is just going to query through all of the Markdown files on our site. So if I play this query, you'll notice over here we have basically like the ID of the path. So it's just pages my first post dot markdown. And if I added in some other Markdown files, then more entries would show up here. So let's do that. Let's add another Markdown file and we'll just call it Markdown 2. I can give this some front matter as well. So we'll just give this a title. So over here, now when I replay this, the new Markdown file should show up. And so here we have that Markdown 2 file showing up. In addition to just accessing the ID, there's also a lot of other things we can access. So if you click Control Space, then this list is gonna pop up. And this will give you everything that you can access about the Markdown file. So one cool thing is this HTML right here. And this HTML will basically just spit out the actual HTML of the Markdown file. So you can use this HTML attribute in order to insert the content of the Markdown file into one of your web pages. We can also access that information that was inside of the front matter. So if I just type out front matter, you'll notice by default it's trying to query for date and parent. But since we only have title, we want to just query for the title. And you'll notice that it's giving us the title of both of these front matter, or both of these Markdown pages. So you can use these Markdown queries in order to access information about the Markdown files that are in your site. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe.